Greetings and welcome back once again, Exorcist fans. It is time for the review of the season finale of episode 10 or chapter 10 of the Exorcist TV series, 3 Rooms. And I want to welcome you especially to this review because it will be the final review for this season, of course. And hopefully, in my punctuation of that, it will not just be a series finale review, but it will in fact be a season finale review as we hope to go into a second season of the Exorcist TV series at some point in the future. Anyway, welcome once again, and I do want to remind you that this will be more than just a summation of the story. This will be my analysis of the story, along with commentary and particular insights that I had. And of course, as a consequence of that, there will be spoilers. So if you have not seen 3 Rooms for whatever reasons and you don't want to be spoiled, please go ahead, watch the show at your convenience, and then come back to this review at a later time. If, however, you are ready to proceed, then let's go forward, because we have some things that I would like to talk about. Now, I'm going to start off with a little bit of a question slash observation. Now, the title of this episode is 3 Rooms, and I'm having a little bit of trouble, so I'm going to reach out to you guys here. I'm having a little bit of trouble deciding what those 3 rooms actually were. Now, we know one of those 3 rooms is Tomas in his mind, in his grandmother's studio apartment, or wherever it was he grew up when he was 6 years old. We also know what the other one of those 3 rooms is. That's, of course, is Angela's little space in her own mind where she compartmentalized and hid herself away from the demon when she was a girl. That's one of 2 of the 3 rooms. But what's the other room? I'm having trouble deciding whether or not that other room belongs to where Bennett and Marcus are being held captive, or whether or not it is the room where the Rance family is being held hostage by Angela. But nonetheless, you guys can tell me what your interpretation of the 3 rooms scenario is, but I do think that 2 of those 3 assertions is correct. So, that is Marcus, should I say Tomas, in his grandmother's place when he was a boy, going back to that. And then, of course, Angela in her safe space from Pazuzu, going back to that when she was a girl. So that's 2 of the 3 rooms. You guys can let me know what you think, what the other one-third of that trio is. But nonetheless, we see here that Tomas is being confronted by Pazuzu in his own mind after he tried to come to the salvation of the Rance family and, of course, failed to do so, at least at this point. So that's the first place where we begin. And it's a very interesting test going on here, a test that I kind of liken to Christ in his wilderness experience to some degree, where the devil comes to him and tempts him with these temptations of the world, these temptations of the flesh, and these temptations of pride, and tells him basically that he is inadequate for the task. So why doesn't he just go ahead and end it all, basically, by denying the authority and power of God? And I think you see a nice, interesting parallel. At least to me, I see that here, and so I wanted to kind of point that out. Okay, so here's the scene where we first learn that the integration is not complete. And we learn that because, of course, here is where Katherine goads, if you will, Pazuzu into telling it that, it didn't fully succeed in capturing control of Regan when she was a little girl. And, of course, Pazuzu proceeds to try to slap Katherine in an attempt to get her to repent, if you will, of that statement. And, of course, her hand is frozen mid-air by Regan, or Angela, if you want to call her that at this point. So, what do we see here? This is very interesting to me because, once again, it tells me that the integration is not complete, and this is where Pazuzu begins to realize that there's something actually wrong. Integration is supposed to be complete, it's supposed to be full, it's supposed to be whole, whatever adjective you want to use, and it's supposed to be permanent. Well, this is where we find out from here that there is still a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of a fight back going on in Angela, where she has decided not to accept this after all. And this is something that I had pointed out before in my last video, that I did not believe integration was permanent, and now we understand why that is. We'll get to a more fuller explanation of why that is later on in the storyline, but we see here that this is the first indication that something is not right with the integration. So here it is, this place in Angela's mind all those years ago where she found herself, as Pazuzu says, a burrow to hide herself in. And I think this is a very interesting moment because, as I said before, it shows to me that there is, in fact, the ability to resist even what might be considered the supernatural, and even to, if you want to put it in a larger perspective, I would dare say that this shows that there is a certain level, even with all the power that these demons have, there is still a certain level within the human spirit, the human mind, that has authority and power over them. Okay, so I think that this is a display of that here in this particular scene. Tick-tock, my lovelies, as Brother Simon says. Now, I should have included this scene as one of the first ones, but nonetheless, this, of course, is the scene where we find out that Bennett is alive, and, of course, we see that Marcus has been captured, and Bennett, or should I say Brother Simon, is now offering both of these men a choice. You can either be integrated with us and become one of our demonically possessed satanic brethren, or you can die. So let's see a little bit more about that. Simon has decided to test both of our warrior priests here with the ultimate test. He cuts their arms with this very interesting looking ritualistic knife, and he says basically that you're going to bleed out unless you choose to be integrated. Now, I think he was probably giving basically one or the other of them the choice. The other one would die anyway. But, of course, we see Bennett is alive. But the choice here is quite interesting to me because now what you're seeing is that these men have the opportunity or the choice, the selection, if you will, to be condemned to an eternity of hell by being integrated, or to basically choose death and stand up for what they believe in are their true convictions. What will they choose? Well, we find out later on in the storyline. Now we finally find out in this scene, which I find quite interesting, as a continuation of what's going on between Marcus, Bennett, and Simon. We find out in this scene that it was indeed Marcus who shot his own father after his father killed his mother when Marcus was still a child. And this is something that I had suspected long ago, that Marcus somehow was the person who killed his father after that horrific act of murder by his dad against his mother. And this is, of course, where Simon begins to use this information to try to basically convince Marcus that, you are nothing but an instrument for the church. They don't really care about you, which Marcus actually agrees with to some degree. And they're only using you. Why give your life for them? Why lay down your life for them? And the answer that Marcus gives to this, to me, is very inspirational and very powerful. When he starts to relay you guys have all heard of the metaphor or the analogy of the three blind men who tried to describe the elephant. One touches the trunk, one touches the tail, and one touches a leg, and they all describe something different. But what does Marcus tell Simon in this regard? I actually love this response by Marcus. He says, he was 12 years old, staring down, as he put it, one of your bastard brothers, which I thought was an excellent way to put that. And he saw God on the other side. He saw the whole bloody elephant, as he puts it. This was a brilliant and very majestical response to me, demonstrating the kind of faith that I think Marcus really does possess at the core of his being. And this is where you see Simon begin to understand that this man is not as weak, he is not as shifty, he is not necessarily as arrogant and pompous and full of pomposity as he thought he was. In other words, Simon was thinking at this point, I can use these traits against this man to tempt him to join us for our purposes. But yet, these things are actually turned against Simon, and in the end, Marcus stands up fully for what he believes in, which is not, as he says, necessarily the bloody church, but for God himself. A very beautiful and, in my opinion, powerfully majestic response. As a response, of course, Simon invokes Vocare Pulveri and leaves the two priests to their fate. One of you will be chosen, the other of you will die. You two can make up your minds as to which one it will be. Now, of course, in this scene, there is something else that is going on, which is still, of course, happening as a backdrop consequence of this. We see that it is the irate Maria Walters who is still trying to be chosen for demonic possession or integration, and she is very upset with Simon that she has not been chosen at this point, despite all of her sacrifices, all that she has given to the cause for the Satanic Brotherhood, and yet she's still being left out in the cold. Simon tells her to know her place, and that is the oxen that pulls the cart. It does not have a place at the table as a welcome guest. And of course, this is a very interesting description of Maria, in my opinion, because it actually shows what the demons and what their possessed hosts think about them, but she still refuses to accept that. Now, what's interesting to me about this also, though, is, as we know, Maria is, in fact, later on chosen by the demon. And the question I have is why? Because in episode 162, chapter 9, 162, we know that Pazuzu tells her, "You're never going to be one of us." Yet, she is, in fact, chosen at the end of this episode for integration. So I question why that actually happened. That seemed kind of odd to me, but it may have been a little bit because of Marcus's interventions on the behalf of Bennett, which we'll get to a little bit later. But still, the demons did not necessarily have to choose her if they didn't want to. So I am wondering what went on here as to why they finally decided to take a woman whom at least one of their brethren said was wholly inadequate for their possession. Maybe someone else didn't agree with that assessment after all. Now, here is the hammer scene in the episode, and I found this to be a very normal, quaint way of getting someone to give in. This, of course, is where Pazuzu, while in control of Angela's body, has given the family a choice. And, of course, we know the reason why. This is, in fact, to make Angela finally submit to him, ultimately, by coming out of that room, or at least letting him in the room, in her mind, one of the three rooms. So what she decides to do is to play this game where she is going to, Pazuzu, that is going to torture the family, the rest of the family, until Reagan actually gives up. So Pazuzu takes a hammer, does a little twisting and turning with it, and it, of course, lands on Katherine, whom we now know will be hit by the hammer at some point, if Pazuzu has his way. So Pazuzu now, in this act of sadism, is now going to force Casey to hit her sister with the hammer, and to hit her as hard as she can in order to make the point to Angela that I am going to do whatever is necessary in order to make you submit to me finally. If it means beating the living hell out of all of the rest of the members of your family, so be it. Ultimately, I think Pazuzu was willing to kill one of the members of the family, and in fact kill every last one of them if Reagan did not finally submit. But that again would have caused Reagan not to have any motivation to submit to Pazuzu at that point. So the demon, in its ingenuity and creativity, probably would have found some other way. But torturing Reagan by making her watch her family be brutalized in this manner was a very effective means. Well, normally, should I say, would be a very effective means of making someone finally submit. It doesn't necessarily mean that when you torture someone, torture has never really been proven to be a very effective form of getting someone to surrender to your control, but on an individual level. But if you make them watch someone else be tortured and or killed, especially if it's someone they care about, that's a different question now, isn't it? And it becomes a point where that level of submission causes someone to say, or that level of torture and control causes someone to be forced to submit a little bit faster, because it's not just them on the line now, is it? It's other people, it's their loved ones, it's other people that they care about, and that takes it to a wholly different level. And Pazuzu, of course, understands that. Now, Pazuzu gives Casey an ultimatum. You either hit your sister in the knee and basically crush her kneecap, or you can watch your father's arms be torn off limb from limb. And this is once again, this is a very classic technique when you're watching people be tortured. So there's nothing particularly special about that here, except of course that it's being used under supernatural power, or being done under supernatural power. But nonetheless, what is interesting about this scene even more is the choice that is made by Casey, and the choice ultimately that is made by Katherine. Casey is unable to follow through with this ultimatum naturally. It's understandable that she was not going to hit her own sister anywhere on her body to do harm to her. So what does Katherine do? She takes the hammer from Casey and she hits herself in the knee, which of course is an action that is really relished by Pazuzu in the end. And as you watch this enjoyment in Pazuzu, you see, of course, that there is really no mercy that is being given over here by the demon. And despite all of its protestations about not wanting to hurt anyone, you see how much it enjoys seeing this pain and anguish being inflicted on the family physically and emotionally. And this tells you ultimately that you cannot ever surrender to this force of darkness and evil, because whatever it says to you, it is really a lie, and it makes no difference to you, to the demon, whether you as an individual live or die in the end, as long as it gets what it wants. Now here we have the rest of the demonic brotherhood in their celestial form, non-corporeal form, maybe if you want to say that too, trying to tempt and trick Father Bennett. They're giving him a vision of his dead sister, whom we now know his name is Anna, and they are talking to him in his delirium as if they are, in fact, his sister. Now, if you see other, supernatural type movies and things like that, you know that demons also usually take the form of other people, usually past loved ones who have died, in order to trick you, or to trick the individual that they're trying to get to into accepting their presence. And if you read other things like Demonology and whatnot, you see that this is also something that is commonly attested to by people who claim to have had encounters with the supernatural, and in particular encounters with demonic activity. They say that a voice came to them as their deceased grandmother, their deceased father, their deceased sister, their deceased child, whatever it may be, and yet in the end they somehow find out that that was not the entity that they were dealing with at all. Anyway, what's going on here in this scene is exactly that. Bennett, in his delirium, thinks he's receiving a heavenly vision, if you will, of his deceased sister, when in fact he is in fact receiving the exact opposite, a hellish one. And so what happens in this scene now is that as Bennett, in losing all this blood, is suffering this illusion, Marcus now sees that he has to intervene in order to save his brother, his fellow priest's life, and ultimately to save his soul from being taken by these demons. So what Marcus does in this scene is rather intriguing to me. He actually starts to tell the distraught and rejected Maria Walters that, look, you want this. You wanted this for all of this time, and yet you're so afraid to take it. What have these creatures done to you? They've passed you over for younger, more attractive, more delicious vessels, female vessels in that sense. They've passed you over for a man. You deserve this. You are just too afraid to take it. Get up off your gluteus maximus